Go ahead and save your work before we go on. So far what we've done is created a very simple variable, we've output the type of variable, and then we've traced that variable, updated the variable, and traced it again. Now what we're going to do is talk about one of the other major concepts about variables, and that is what's called encapsulation. So if we create a variable on the main the main frame that we have here, the main timeline, it's what's considered a quote-unquote global variable. So I'm going to create another variable. This is going to be for my last name. Var my last name, and this will be a string, equals Ross, and you of course can put your own last name there. Now what I'm going to do is create a simple function, and that will be to trace the name. For this function, I'm going to trace my last name, which is that value. Now if I test this movie, I do have to actually invoke that function or instantiate it. So there we are instantiating that function. So if we run this now, then you'll see that we're able to output the value of that string, because that string or that variable is actually on the main timeline, but this function is able to access that variable that's on the main timeline because the function is inside the timeline. Now where does this get a little funky? Let's say that we want to actually create the variable inside that function instead. So I'm going to include the variable inside the function, and now I'm going to take the tracing of that variable so it's outside of the function. So now you'll see that we have the function here, trace name, and let's run that function. I guess we would need to run that function before we can do anything. So I'll run the function so that it creates the variable, and then I'll try and trace that variable. And you'll see that we get a variable last name is not defined. Now the reason why is because we're defining this variable inside that function, which means that that variable is only accessible inside that function. It's not accessible from outside the function. So what we could do though is we could create this variable outside the function. So I'm going to move that back outside the function, and I'm actually going to remove the equals part. So all I'm doing is creating the variable outside the function. Then what I'm going to do is inside the function, I'm going to change what the value is. Then I can run the function and then output what the variable is. So since I've created the variable on the main timeline, then I can update the variable inside the function, running the function there, and then trace the output of it. So you'll see now it's working again. Hopefully that concept makes sense, but this is a very important thing. This concept is based upon what's called encapsulation, which means that variables are only accessible inside the objects that they're created in. You can also call this scope. When an object or when a variable is created on the main timeline, it's accessible by anything that's on the main timeline, including all the sub-functions of the timeline. If it's created inside a function itself, then it's only accessible inside that function unless you are able to maybe update an existing variable inside that function. And then of course that variable is accessible other places. So this is a very common thing for you to actually create your variables outside of your functions and then update variables inside functions and use them later. So hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead and save your work, and let's go on to the next part.